60 welfare checks. That is the number of times that officers from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department knocked on Gary Fenwick's door between 1999 and 2017. 60 times. Because Gary Fenwick was elderly and lived alone, and his neighbors occasionally worried about him. A polite man in his late 60s who kept to himself, tended his property, waved from the driveway. 60 times, deputies stood on the porch of that house on Mesquite Canyon Road and spoke to him through the screen door, or in the yard, or at the mailbox. They checked on him in summer heat and winter cold. They noted in their logs that the resident was fine, no concerns, no action required. They had no idea that for most of those 18 years, a woman was buried on that property. Her name was Deborah Ruiz. She was 34 years old. She was a mother of two. And on a September evening in 1999, she drove to Gary Fenwick's house to collect money he owed her from a landscaping job, and she never came home. Nobody connected those welfare checks to a missing woman for nearly 2 decades. But a property tax lien, a county assessor's notice, and one retired detective who still carried her file in the back of his truck changed everything in 2017. The Inland Empire in 1999 was a place of relentless expansion. Subdivisions were going up faster than the roads to serve them. The orange groves that had defined the region for a century were being pulled out by their roots to make way for cul-de-sacs, big box stores, and the commuter corridors that fed workers into Los Angeles each morning and returned them each night. It was a landscape of possibility and erasure in equal measure. The old California giving way to something newer and louder, while out on the edges of that growth, in the unincorporated land east of Moreno Valley, where the desert started to reassert itself, there were still stretches of road where you could go a long way between neighbors. Mesquite Canyon Road was one of those roads. Deborah Ruiz had grown up in the valley, in Paris, the youngest of 5 children in a family that had been in the Inland Empire since her grandparents arrived from Michoacán in the 1950s. She was 34 years old in the summer of 1999, and she had built herself a small but solid life. She worked as a bookkeeper for a landscaping company called Desert Verde Landscaping, handling accounts receivable, invoices, payment tracking, chasing down clients who fell behind. She had been doing it for 4 years. Her boss described her as the person who kept the business running, the one who remembered every outstanding invoice and every excuse a client had ever given for not paying one. She was the mother of 2 children, a son aged 9 and a daughter aged 6, and she raised them largely on her own, though her family was close and her mother helped 3 evenings a week. The children called her grandmother Abuelita Tere and knew the phone number by heart. Deborah had a ritual with her kids. Every Friday night, no exceptions, she made tamales with whatever filling they requested, and they ate at the kitchen table together without the television on. Her specific personal detail, the one that every person who knew her mentioned, was her ledger book. She kept a small green accounts ledger in her car at all times. Every outstanding payment was written in it by hand in her careful block print, with the client's name, the amount owed, and the date the invoice had been sent. She updated it every Monday morning. It was, she told her boss, how she made sure nobody got away with not paying. In August 1999, Desert Verde Landscaping had completed a landscaping job at a property on Mesquite Canyon Road. The client's name was Gary Fenwick. The invoice was for $940. It had not been paid in 30 days. Then 60. By September, it appeared in Deborah's ledger as overdue, flagged, requiring follow-up. On the evening of September 17th, she told her mother she was driving out to collect the money personally. She had done this before with difficult clients. She expected to be home by 9. She kissed her children goodnight before she left. Her daughter was already in pajamas. Her son was doing homework at the kitchen table. She never came home. Deborah's mother called the Riverside County Sheriff's Department at 11:45 that night. At first, the deputies who responded did not treat the call with the urgency Teresa Ruiz felt it deserved. Deborah was a 34-year-old adult woman. She had told her mother she was going to collect a payment from a client. Adults, the deputies explained, sometimes changed their plans. They logged the report. They said to call back in the morning if she still hadn't returned. By morning, she hadn't. The lead investigator assigned to the case was Detective Ramon Villanueva, 36 years old, a 12-year veteran of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department who had worked financial crimes and major crimes in roughly equal measure. He was a methodical man who kept his case notes in a spiral-bound notebook rather than a ring binder. Ring binders, he said, made you think you could rearrange the story. Spiral notebooks kept things in order and kept you honest. He had Deborah's ledger within 48 hours. Her boss gave it to him without hesitation. The last entry was for Gary Fenwick, Mesquite Canyon Road, dated September 15th. Amount, $940. Overdue, Detective Villanueva drove to Mesquite Canyon Road on September 19th, 2 days after Deborah disappeared. Gary Fenwick answered the door. He was 67 years old, gray-haired, unhurried. He invited Villanueva inside without hesitation. He said yes, Deborah Ruiz had come by a couple of evenings ago. He had paid her cash, he said, which he preferred for transactions like that. She had counted it, thanked him, and left. He had no idea she was missing. He seemed, by every visible measure, genuinely concerned. He offered coffee. Villanueva accepted it, walked the exterior of the property as Fenwick spoke, noted the layout, noted the man's manner, and left with nothing he could use. Fenwick's account could not be disproved. No neighbors had seen Deborah's car arrive or leave. The properties on Mesquite Canyon Road were widely spaced, with long driveways and a lot of open desert between them. Her white 1994 Honda Civic had not been located. The property itself, during the walk around, showed nothing inconsistent with a working residence. Fenwick had no prior criminal record. He did not become defensive or evasive. He asked Villanueva twice whether there was anything he could do to help. He was interviewed again in December 1999 and again in March 2000. Each time cooperative, each time consistent, each time exactly the same story in exactly the same order. The investigation pressed outward. Deborah's former partner, the father of her children, had a documented alibi and was eliminated within the first month. A dispute with a commercial client from earlier in the year was examined and cleared. Her phone records, subpoenaed in October, showed nothing unusual in the days before her disappearance. Her bank accounts, the detail that sat in Villanueva's chest like a weight he couldn't put down, showed zero activity after September 17th. No cash withdrawals, no card transactions, no transfers, nothing. People who are alive move money. Deborah Ruiz had not moved any money in 3 months. Villanueva made 3 more visits to Mesquite Canyon Road in 2000. He drove the road at different times of day. He spoke to the nearest neighbors, a couple 3 properties down who had been there since 1993, and asked about Fenwick. They described him as quiet, private, reliable, always kept the place up. Waved from the driveway. There was nothing to arrest him on. There was nothing to search the property for. In 1999, in Riverside County, without physical evidence or a witness, the threshold for a search warrant on private property was not met by the combination of a last known appointment and a man who had given a plausible account. By mid-2000, the active investigation had been formally scaled back to review status. Deborah Ruiz was classified as a missing person, presumed at risk. Her children were being raised by their grandmother on Paris Avenue. Her name was entered into a database. She had disappeared, and the man who knew where she was had offered the investigating detective a cup of coffee. The years moved in the particular way that years move around an unresolved absence. Deborah's mother, Teresa, kept her daughter's room at the back of the house exactly as it was. She took in her grandchildren permanently in 2001 and raised them through their school years. Every year, on September 17th, she lit a candle at the kitchen table in the morning and left it burning all day. The children learned, as they grew older, what the candle was for. By 2003, 4 years had passed. Deborah's son was 13, her daughter was 10. They had a photograph of their mother on the living room wall, the one from a family quinceañera in 1996, in which she was laughing at something off camera, her head turned slightly, her hand raised. They grew up under that photograph. Teresa had submitted Deborah's name to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System and to every equivalent California database she could find. She had hired an attorney in 2004 to write a formal request for a review of the case file. The response confirmed the case was open and being monitored. On Mesquite Canyon Road, Gary Fenwick continued his life. He was a man of orderly habits. He maintained his property. He observed his neighbors. When county deputies knocked on his door for welfare checks, the first one came in early 2000, requested by a neighbor who had noticed his car sitting in the same spot for 4 days. He answered calmly, thanked them for checking, and offered no reason for concern. The checks continued at irregular intervals over the years. A new neighbor, a stretch of unusual silence. A different deputy each time, working from a log that noted the address, the date, the outcome. Resident present. Appears well, no concerns. Page after page, year after year. Detective Ramon Villanueva retired from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department in 2009. Before he went, he did what he always did with his unresolved cases. He wrote a summary memo for each one and attached it to the front of the file. Deborah Ruiz's memo was 2 pages long. At the bottom, he added a note in his own handwriting. Last known contact, Fenwick, G., Mesquite Canyon Road. Story never fully checked. Revisit if property ever changes hands or owner dies. He kept a photocopy of that memo in a folder in the back of his truck. He drove that truck for the next 8 years. Deborah's daughter graduated from high school in 2011. Her son married in 2014. Teresa Ruiz, in her late 70s, still lit the candle every September 17th. The photograph on the living room wall was the same one. Her hand was still raised. She was still laughing. You have stayed with this story a long way, and stories like this one, the ones that should have been solved long ago, told fully and carefully, are why this channel exists. If this kind of work matters to you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It makes this possible. Now, back to Deborah. In the spring of 2017, the Riverside County Assessor's Office sent Gary Fenwick a notice of property tax delinquency. Fenwick had fallen behind on payments, not dramatically, not in a way that suggested crisis, but enough that the county filed a lien. The lien was a public record. It triggered, automatically, a flag in the county's record system for properties with delinquency notices against owners over the age of 70. A county social worker made a home visit in April. Fenwick answered the door. He was 85 now, visibly older, moving slowly. He said he was fine. He said he had been meaning to sort out the taxes. The social worker made a note. She also noticed, in the course of their conversation at the doorway, that the property, always neat, always well kept when deputies had checked on it over the years, looked different. Overgrown in places. A section of fencing along the rear of the lot had come down. She filed a report. The report, as a matter of routine, was cross-referenced with active welfare records for the address. A clerical supervisor in the county office noticed that the address on Mesquite Canyon Road appeared not only in the current welfare file, but also through an old cross-reference flag that Ramon Villanueva had placed on the address before he retired, in the Riverside County Sheriff's active missing persons database. She forwarded the flag to the sheriff's cold case unit. The detective who picked up the forwarded flag was Sergeant Lisa Dominguez, 43 years old, who had been working cold cases for 6 years after a decade in homicide. She pulled the Ruiz file on a Tuesday morning, read Villanueva's 2-page summary memo, read the handwritten note at the bottom, and immediately called the retired detective. Ramon Villanueva answered on the second ring. He had been waiting, without knowing it, for 18 years. The Ruiz case, Dominguez said. Fenwick, he said, before she could say anything else, just that name, after 18 years. The property. It was always the property. Within 72 hours, Sergeant Dominguez had secured a search warrant for the Mesquite Canyon Road address, citing the original missing person case. Villanueva's documented suspicion of incomplete verification, and new grounds established by the delinquency flag and welfare cross-reference. On a Thursday morning in late April 2017, a forensic excavation team began working the rear section of the property, behind the fallen fence line. They found Deborah Ruiz on the second day. She was identified by dental records within 48 hours of recovery. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as blunt force trauma. The remains had been buried at a depth consistent with intentional concealment. Several personal effects were recovered with her, including, in fragmentary condition, the cover of a small green ledger book. Gary Fenwick was arrested at a care facility in Hemet on May 3, 2017. He had moved there 8 months earlier, when managing the Mesquite Canyon Road property had become too physically difficult for a man of 85. He had sold the property in 2016, a detail that, had anyone been monitoring it, might have triggered a review sooner. But no one had been monitoring it actively. He had moved to the care facility, settled into his room, and continued his orderly life. He was in the common room reading a newspaper when the detectives arrived. He was 85 years old, hunched, slow-moving. The arresting officers were professional and not unkind. He did not resist. He did not ask questions. He stood when they asked him to stand, walked when they asked him to walk, and was placed in the vehicle without incident. He did not look back at the common room. The couple who had lived 3 properties down since 1993, the same neighbors Villanueva had interviewed in 2000, were among the first people on Mesquite Canyon Road notified of the arrest. The woman told a reporter from the Press Enterprise that she had waved to Fenwick at his mailbox the previous Christmas. She had asked him how he was keeping. He had said fine, thank you, and raised his hand. She said she didn't know what to do with that now. The trial in Riverside County Superior Court began in March 2018. The defense argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial, that the presence of remains on a property sold by the defendant did not establish beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant had caused the death. They argued that 18 years of weather, soil movement, and the transfer of property ownership created reasonable doubt about chain of custody. The prosecution presented 4 categories of evidence. The first was the forensic evidence itself, the manner of burial, the depth, and the recovery of personal effects alongside the remains, including the green ledger cover. Medical examiners testified that the burial was not accidental and not recent. The evidence of decomposition was consistent with a date range beginning in late 1999. The second was Deborah's ledger entry, preserved in the original case file since 1999. Fenwick, G. $940. Overdue, the last outstanding account in her book. The third was Villanueva's testimony. He took the stand and walked the jury, precisely and methodically, through 18 years of suspicion he had not been able to prove, the 3 return visits to the road, the bank account with no activity after September 17th, the note he had written and left in the file and kept a copy of in his truck. He was 62 years old on the witness stand, and he spoke without notes. The fourth was a recorded phone call. In the days following his arrest, before counsel had fully advised him, Fenwick had used the care facility's phone to call a distant cousin in Arizona. The call was recorded as a matter of routine. In it, speaking in a voice that was tired and flat, he said, "They were always going to find her eventually. I just didn't think it would be me who was still alive when they did." The courtroom was silent when the recording finished. He was convicted of first-degree murder on November 14, 2018. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. He was 86 years old at sentencing. He will die in custody. Outside the courthouse, Deborah's daughter, now 32 years old, the same age her mother had been when she drove to Mesquite Canyon Road, read a statement she had written herself, in longhand, on a single sheet of paper. "My mother kept a ledger so nobody could get away with not paying what they owed," she said. In the end, that ledger was part of what found her. She folded the paper. She did not add anything else. She had said everything that needed saying. Gary Fenwick had lived on Mesquite Canyon Road for 18 years, with Deborah Ruiz buried behind his fence line. He had answered 60 welfare checks. He had offered coffee to the detective investigating her disappearance. He had maintained his property, observed his neighbors, accepted his mail, tended his routine. What undid him was not a witness, not a confession, not a forensic breakthrough. What undid him was a property tax bill he didn't pay, a clerical cross-reference flag that a retiring detective had planted in a database 8 years earlier, and a county supervisor who noticed that 2 records from 2 different departments pointed at the same address. Bureaucracy found what investigation could not reach. Deborah Ruiz was 34 years old. She drove to Mesquite Canyon Road on a September evening with a name in her ledger and an outstanding invoice, the way she had done with difficult clients before, because she believed that people who owed money should pay it and that nobody should get to pretend otherwise. She had kissed her children goodnight before she left. Her daughter was in pajamas. Her son was doing homework. She had every right to come home. Her ledger, the small green book, the careful block print, the Monday morning ritual, is the image that stays. She kept it so nobody could disappear a debt. She could not have known that it would one day help make sure she herself could not be disappeared entirely. Teresa Ruiz lit the candle on Mesquite Canyon Road on September 17, 2017. She lit it on September 17, 2018, after the conviction. She has lit it every year since. It burns all day, as it always has. The photograph on the living room wall has not changed. Deborah is still laughing, her hand still raised. What do you do with 60 welfare checks? 60 opportunities where a different question, a different flag, a different connection between departments might have found her sooner. Does that change who is responsible, or does it only change how long the responsible man got to live free? And what does it tell us that it was an unpaid tax bill, not an investigation, that finally broke this case open? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, we read every one. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing, however long and however unlikely the path, subscribe. Deborah's case is one of many waiting to be told. More are in the description below. Deborah Ruiz, 34 years old. Paris, California, 1999, remembered.